Yeah, no worries. I know you were up for that. Yes, that's right. No, I wasn't.
I used to be able to tape it and become closer. I tape it and it already clicked.
I know what you speak of it sometimes. I've never taken a class. So what
Good afternoon. Welcome to the culmination of our Founders Week. This is the week in which St. John's College recognizes and honors our Johannean heritage, our relationship with the St. John's University of Shanghai. And so first I want to take an opportunity to thank the many St. John's alumni who are here tonight. If you can just wave, they're in the front here, but you'll see them. Just wave, just say hello. Please welcome them to the college. I just want to make a few comments. The first is that you'll notice that many of the Johanneans here tonight are ladies. And I want to mention this because many of our guests tonight were also students at St. Mary's. And St. Mary's was the high school, the women's high school that was affiliated with St. John's University. So in addition to being Johanneans, they're also St. Mary's girls. I can say that, right? And I mention this also because last night at dinner we recognized Dr. Shu. And Dr. Shu is a past president of the St. John's University Alumni Association in Vancouver. She was also a professor in the medical school at Hong Kong University, had an incredibly distinguished career as a pathologist. But now she is, I think, a full-time historian of St. John's history. And I want to mention that she is an editor of a 3-volume history of St. Mary's School that is available in our office. It is unfortunately only in Chinese at this point. But it is available in the office if any of you are interested in the history of St. Mary's. And I think she also has some stickers that she gave us today of St. Mary's School as well. So I just want to mention that because this is a part of the St. John's story that we should mention more often, but that St. John's also has a middle school as well as St. Mary's School, and that the St. Mary's girls are really impressive, enthusiastic keepers of the St. John's spirit. So I want to congratulate Dr. Shu on this momentous publication and also welcome her back again to St. John's. So please, congratulations. Also last night, Henry also mentioned that one of the special gifts that we received this year was the diploma of Charles C.C. Wong. We have 2 diplomas, original St. John's University diplomas, both of which hang in the St. John's Alumni Hall. Now, Charles C.C. Wong was a great supporter of St. John's College. I think George mentioned that briefly at the reception last night. There is a scholarship at St. John's College named after Charles and Sophia Wong. And his family have been very steadfast in their support of St. John's College, especially now with the donation of the diploma. So I want to mention that we also have the 3-volume autobiography of Charles C.C. Wong that's also available at the office. So those of you who are interested in that history, please come by the office and borrow the book and learn more about his life and that of the Johanneans. So I feel like I'm giving a book talk, actually, but because I'm going to also mention that we also have the autobiography of our guest speaker tonight, Dr. George Shen. And this is also available at the office. So for those of you who are interested in reading this, please come by the office and borrow this book. But we are just so pleased to have Dr. George Shen and his wife Jane join us this week. Dr. Shen is an incredibly distinguished Johannean. He was a graduate of St. John's University in 1949. His career is so distinguished that I'm not going to go through this because I think some of this may come out in the conversation later on. But I'll mention that Dr. Shen worked in the film industry in Hong Kong for a period. He worked in Tokyo for the Asian Productivity Organization for many years. In fact, he tells me his children grew up in Japan. Dr. Shen is also a fluent speaker of Japanese. Dr. Shen was also the editor of the Hong Kong Economic Journal as well before his retirement. He also has a doctorate in economics And in his retirement, he now lives in San Francisco. And so Dr. Shen, as also mentioned, was one of the founders of St. John's College. So in the early 90s, when St. John's College was still in the planning process, Dr. Shen was very heavily involved in planning and creating this college. So when we say he's a founder, he really is a founder of St. John's College. And so we're just so delighted to have him here with us to join us for Founders Week. So for this evening, for the next while, we're going to have a conversation with Dr. Shen. We'll hear some of his stories. And we've asked two of our residents, Edgar Liao and Zoe Lam, to lead us in this conversation, to interview Dr. Shen, and then to open up the conversation to everyone in this room. So please join me in welcoming Dr. George Shen, St. John's College.
Just a few pointers before we begin. This interview session is being recorded for legacy as well as for archival purposes. Therefore, I kindly request that everybody remember to turn off your handphone or switch to silent, because if it rings during the interview, I will mention your name so that it's recorded for posterity that your handphone went off during the interview. So it'll take a few seconds now to turn off your phone or keep it silent. Right. And I can't emphasize, I have been having breakfast conversations with Dr. Shen and his wife for the past few days, and I can't emphasize how talented and how experienced he is as a person. So feel free to ask any questions on any topic and think of film, music, movies. He's also very well traveled. He's been to many countries, including probably your own, so don't hesitate. Zoe and I will start out with a few questions for Dr. Shen, and we will then open the questioning to the floor. Right? So if there are no objections, we will now continue. We will now begin with, again, ladies first, always. Yes.
Thank you. So we know that Dr. Shen graduated in St. John's University in 1949. So we're all Johanneans here. So we're curious how it is like to study in St. John's University back then.
It's a good question, because it's so long ago. Well, St. John's University was not a very sort of large university if you compare to UBC, because I think when we were there were only, 700 something students, if I remember correctly, because Stanley and I were in the same class. During my time, between 1945 and 49, China was in civil war. Because just after the conclusion of the First World War, Second World War, it's the 70th years anniversary this year for the starting of the war, China and Japan. So we had quite a, unique experience. On the one hand, we were very happy that China became sort of one of the victorious Allied nations. But actually, on the other hand, the country was very weak, divided, civil war, corruption, inflation, you name it, we had everything. And as students, many of us demonstrated against the government, against hunger, against civil war, but still we managed to study. And I myself belong to the group that we didn't take part in all these activities. We confined ourselves in the library and the bridge table. But I did take part in one demonstration in Shanghai, anti-hunger. And we were marching, I think, through Nanking Road. And the police or the army charged her with cavalry and water hose. So being a non-activist, I just slipped away and went into a department store. That's all my experience. But we did have, student movements, and we had, different, how do we put it? We did have Kuomintang students and communist students. When we knew who they were, but we never really spoke out about them. And So that was roughly, And to describe you the situation of inflation, the small kitchen that we go to have food refuse to accept banknotes anymore because prices change. So they only accepted silver dollars. It's illegal. But say $1 silver, you can have 10 meals. So I prepaid $1 silver and I had 1 meal. The next day I went and demanded my meal. They say, oh, your friends signed up and they consumed your other 90 cents and other 90 meals already. Because they came to the, shall we say, kitchen and found that prices had gone up so much that they didn't have the money to pay. So they look at, oh, George Shen's got 9 more meals. They just had their meal. And that was sort of, the situation. And we all hoped that the Kuomintang government would collapse as soon as possible, because nothing can be worse than that, than this corrupt government. And we were not. Most people, of course, were afraid of the communists, because the word communists carries some meaning that they are going to confiscate your property. But what we thought, we don't have any money anyway, so why should we be afraid? And so, I mean, that's sort of the sentiment at that time. But also in the meantime, during the post-war years, Shanghai was a sort of an international city in the sense that a lot of American influence came to Shanghai with all the GIs and all sorts of things. So that we in Shanghai were sort of the first among Chinese after the war to have very direct contacts with the outside world, especially the United States, I should say. And that, I think, our previous St. John's graduates could, they didn't have this experience. Those who graduated before us during the Japanese occupation, it's a different world. Earlier ones, again, different. Of course, after my class, China changed. And so, again, the environment became quite different from what we had experienced during these years. Okay, I think I'm talking too much.
It's okay, Dr. Shen. I'm a historian, so I love history. So about a historical question, I think some of our new residents, and even the more senior residents, including myself, right, are not that familiar with the college's history and its establishment for SJC itself. Okay, since you were so heavily involved in the founding of SJC, could you give all of us a sense of how this college came to be, how it came to be about, and what were some of the challenges that you faced while trying to found this college?
Oh, yes. Now, because our university, together with other Christian universities, there were 13 in China, were all closed down in 1952. And, but in Hong Kong, we had an alumni association which was started, I think, back in the 1920s or 30s, one of the oldest alumni associations. And we were there. Then in 1986, China established their first alumni association, revived rather, in Beijing. And Hong Kong sent a delegation to China to get into touch. And so in 1988, Hong Kong, we organized the first world reunion of Johanneans in Hong Kong. And Johanneans from all over the world, from China, from Taiwan, from United States, from Australia, from United Kingdom, from Europe, came to Hong Kong. And our common aim was to re-establish St. John's University in Shanghai. And I was sort of the coordinator for that re-establishment committee and went to China for meetings and all that. But then we discovered it was next to impossible because of maybe political reasons, the authorities in China, they were not very keen that St. John's people wanted to revive this foreign university, especially a Christian university with the name Saint. And but in the meantime, in Taiwan, our alumni in Taiwan and Hong Kong raised the money to establish St. John's and St. Mary's Technical Institute in Taipei, near Taipei called Xinpu. But the government there also didn't want the name St. John's. So they called it in Chinese Xinpu Technical College Institute. But in English, because the Taiwan government didn't mind any English, we called it St. John's and St. Mary's Technical Institute. And that was about 50 years ago, in 67, I think. But our sort of desire to have St. John's revived in Shanghai yielded no results. And so one day, Dr. Strange-Wei of UBC, president, came to Hong Kong, and he happened to be a friend of one of the Johanneans, Robert Ho. And they met, and somehow they say, Dr. Strange said, why not have a St. John's College here? Kind of a graduate school, resident college. So Robert Ho called me right away. I was still in bed because I worked night shifts as a newspaper editor. So I went, met Robert Ho and Dr. Strange-Wei and another lawyer friend of his. And we decided something to have this one. That was in 1989. The timing was very bad because it was just after the Tiananmen thing. And I think there might have been some misunderstanding on the part of our Johanneans in China. I'm only speculating that you guys in Hong Kong tried to establish this one because of that. It actually had nothing to do with it. But somehow this idea started, but we met rather skepticism, maybe too much objection from a lot of Johanneans. They insisted that we must have our alma mater in Shanghai. But Robert Ho and I sort of thought this idea is a good one. So we started to ask around. And the overseas Johanneans, some of them, seems to be in favor. And that's how we started it in 1989. And tried to raise some funds. And we went to the Hong Kong Association. Very few people were willing to donate money. I traveled with Charles C.C. Wang to Taiwan to raise money, not very successful. Then, after a few years, because I retired, I came to the United States. But before that, I was traveling back and forth across the Pacific and found out that overseas Johanneans many of them were in support of this idea. And so we started to have a fundraising, of course with some leading contributions from, say, Robert Ho, say, Charles Wang, and Charles Wang's in-laws, Sir QWD of Hong Kong. He's not a Johannean. And say myself, we raised some initial money, and then in the United States or overseas, with my retirement, I was sort of writing letters according to the roster of all these overseas associations trying to raise money. And we raised funds for this college, not in terms of thousands or 10,000, in terms of $50, $100. And we succeeded eventually in meeting the goal. And the foundation was laid here in 1996, early. And I was here, and of course, Lily was here. You were here, and quite a number of Vancouver Johanneans, of course, took part. And I should say that by that time, everybody could see that we had realized part of our dream already with the foundation laid. So that gathered further support from Johanneans. And so here we are. That's it.
I know that the alumni founded this college with the hope of passing on the Johannean spirit. So could you share with us what the Johannean spirit means to you?
Oh, closer to the Johannean spirit is something very difficult to describe. Just one thing. Our university was closed down in 1952. Also, other Christian universities closed down at the same time. But I dare say that none of them continue to have alumni associations like St. John's. That's one thing. And I think St. John's spirit is something very difficult to describe. We only spent most of us 4 years together. And many of them didn't even know each other when we were at St. John's. But all those years, we have been sort of having this togetherness. We have something in common. What is that in common? Again, it's difficult to say because, so we call it the St. John spirit. This college is, yes, a realization of the spirit. And we are, shall we say, all octogenarians now. We still look forward to fostering and perpetuating the spirit because we think that this is something which can be passed on if we make an effort to show that it's some common goal that we need to strive for, shall we say. Because in St. John's, it's a very unique educational institution in that it was established by the China Mission of the Episcopal Church, United States. But at that time, there was a debate whether to lay emphasis on evangelism or education. But the mission decided very wisely that it's more important to have education, to let the Chinese people learn about their own values as well as maybe our values, to serve as a bridge east and west so that we can understand each other better. And so that was, shall we say, the first part of the St. John spirit. East meets west, and the sharing of Christian and Chinese traditional values in the Chinese values at that time, of course, more or less equal to Confucian teachings of Confucius. So that's why our motto in English, it's a Christian motto, light and truth. Whereas in Chinese, it's taken from the Confucius, and it's, if I may say, 学而不思则罔思而不学则殆. That means you have to keep on learning and think. If you learn without thinking, it's no good. If you just think and don't learn, again, it's dangerous. So it's a combination of these philosophies. And that may be the binding force that instilled into us, sort of inspired us to look forward, try to foster this idea to other people. And you may call that St. John's spirit.
So Dr. Shen, from your memoirs and our conversations, right? Part of being a Johannean is being able to be multilingual as well as multicultural. That is, of course, easier said for you than for me, right? In the sense that I think I don't have that much talent for languages as well as cultural competence. So I'm wondering whether you can give us any advice and recommendations on how do you learn to be multilingual? How do you learn to acquire cultural competence in many different cultures?
Well, you're asking this person. Partly again, maybe because of the St. John's, develop how do you say, a quest for knowledge, in a sense. And you learn new things. Because, for instance, I love to play bridge as a student. But I'm very happy that I gave it up. And all the time that I would have spent on bridge playing, I spent on like languages or other subjects. Mainly for self-improvement, self-cultivation. Languages sometimes out of necessity. Japanese, I was forced to learn Japanese in the Japanese occupation. Very, very unwillingly. Italian, because I was working with an import-export firm doing business with Italy. And they wrote letters in Italian with the English translation. And when I read all these letters, it seemed to me that I could understand some Italian, so I decided to study it more seriously. And one day I wrote back a letter in Italian and everybody was surprised. That sort of thing. But I've forgotten almost all my Italian because it's 60, 70 years ago, in the early 50s. French, because I was in Europe, and many friends say, how can come to Europe without knowing French? That really caused me to ponder, why is French so important? But at that time, the French people in Europe, when you speak English, they just ignore you. The French are very, very proud people, So I said, well, then I should study French. And I studied with a private tutor. And then the tutor said, you're okay, you join the Alliance Française. I joined the Alliance Française. But all these French-speaking people, when we met, we speak English. So when I went to France, after thinking that I was quite fluent and took the metro, the subway, I couldn't understand the word, what other people were saying. Really gave me a shock. Because I could carry on conversation with my teacher. And that's more, but reading is okay, of course. And as a tourist, you can manage with some tourist French when you go to France. That's not too difficult. I think everybody can do that. As long as you have a willpower to learn something, whether it's a language, it's anything else, I think you'll be able to learn it.
And I have another question about cultural competence. So a lot of us here are new to such a multicultural environment, and I know that you've lived everywhere, in Shanghai, Hong Kong, Japan, the US, and other places. So do you have any advice for people like us who are new to a multicultural place?
Oh, this is a very small world nowadays. By the way, how many of you are from other continents? Anyone from Africa? Yes? Europe? Asia? Lots. So this is multicultural already. We cannot avoid getting in touch with people from different countries, from different continents, from different backgrounds. But you have to make an effort, because if you don't communicate with others, people won't usually, won't really communicate with you as well, because it's a two-way street. So there are certain people by nature, say extrovert or introvert, even though you put them in a sort of a multicultural society, they may not communicate with other people that easily. And so I think it's very important that, number one, do not be shy. Number two, try to understand other people's sort of way of life, way of thinking. Don't always talk about yourself. That's what my wife used to tell me. I'm too talkative. But listen to what others have to say to you. So that's how you understand other people. Especially when you meet someone from a place you have never been to. It's a very good opportunity to have cross-fertilization of ideas, to learn from each other. And I think, if I may say so, my whole life, it's truly a learning process. If you are always willing to learn and willing to find out what the others feel, then it's halfway to what you were asking. Thank you.
On that note, to find out how others feel and think, I'd like to open the floor to questions. I will not open to the floor of questions, right? Open this. Does anybody have any questions? No, go ahead.
Hello, my name is Adubia Foley. Can everyone hear me?
Maybe walk up and you can speak into the mic and it'll be easier.
Hello, good evening. My name is Adubia Foley. I'm from Ghana. I just want to start off by saying thank you very much for the work that you've done. I've been here for 2 weeks and I really enjoyed the environment here. The question that I have is that there's a debate going back home in Ghana that if you really want to make a difference in your country, if you really want to give back, you have to be in your country. So I just wanted to get an idea from you, how you feel on that level. Is it possible to give back to your country and by living in another country, or is it best to be on the ground to make a difference?
Thank you. If I may answer this from the Johannean's point of view, you are Johannean origin. In our school anthem, we say, sorry, I have to refer to it because the college days done, stirred by high ambition, armed against the foes of men, vice and superstition. Our native land to serve, this shall be our mission. So light and truth shall come. We serve our native land. So my answer to your query is, your mission as a Johannean is to serve your native land. Whether you are in your own country or outside of your country, doesn't matter, as long as you bear this mission in mind. We Johanneans, in old days we say we act as a bridge between the East and West. Of course, the world is not limited to the East and West. We talk about North and South. We talk about, if I may use the term, first world, second world, third world countries. Our mission is to serve our country so that people outside will understand our country better, and people in our own country will understand outside world better. That is the mission of a Johannean. So in those days, when the St. John's University was first established, the mission was for the Chinese students to learn Western values, but to serve their own country. But nowadays, it's not limited to that, because the world has become quite different from the 19th century, and a lot of people are living overseas or learning from other countries. But just bear in mind that as a Johannean, we will have a mission eventually to serve our own country. So in your case, Ghana is an emerging economy and needs someone like you very badly. Whether you are here in another country or in your home country, doesn't matter, as long as you bear this in mind. It's our mission to serve our homeland. Do I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shen. The next question, Rocky.
Good evening, Dr. Shen, and good evening, dear Johannes. And my question, I'm from China, and my question is that I heard that you try to rehabilitate the St. John's College in Shanghai when it was 1950. But the Communist Party didn't want you to import Christianity into the new China because of the ideology of the politics. But I'm sure that you feel very disappointed with the new government. And what if I, as a Chinese and as a native Chinese, also feel very disappointed with my government now? And in this content, how do I serve my homeland if I don't love this government? Thank you.
Thank you. I think your sentiments are shared by many of your compatriots. I don't know. But I have to make a comment that we in China have sort of succeeded in reviving part of St. John's in cooperation with Jiaotong University, to have some kind of courses. I don't know how. It's still in the embryonic stage, but from what I learned from the late Johannean Dr, China, I don't know whether it's the government or the whatever, will be investing 70 billion yuan into this new project to have not St. John's University, but it's a college called the name of Shenjiang. Shenjiang, phonetically, it's like St. John's. Shen means Shanghai, Jiang is the river. And it's still in the planning stage. But it is going to come into reality in the matter of years. So, you may say, you can still serve your country in the sense that if you're inside China, whether you're in China or outside China, we Chinese, despite where you live, or whether you have adopted another nationality, become a citizen of another country, in your blood you're still Chinese. And the mission is to promote more understanding. Now it comes between East and West. You serve a bridge culturally and share the knowledge of whatever your special field with other people. And in the meantime, so that they know that you are doing this, in a way, if I may say so, out of your St. John spirit, because this is my mission. You're doing this, whether you love your government or not, is outside of question, because you love China, you love the Chinese tradition, you love the Chinese civilization and culture, and values, for instance. And you're willing to share this with people from other regions, other countries. And that is, I think, what we should do. Because nowadays, national boundaries are secondary. The important thing is that we are all in the family, as you have the motto around the table. And I don't think we should say, okay, you are from here and you are, or we are, and I don't like this government and so forth. No. We all have to live together, and we all have to work together for the betterment of the world we live in. So I think we look at the bigger picture and work together, then tomorrow may be better, if I answered your question.
Thank you, Dr. Shen. Can I have the next question, please? Abi?
I have a quick question regarding, I think Dr. Lee mentioned about you were in various, I think, film business, as I can understand. Could you talk a little bit about how or whether your family helped you into that, and how was your transition to the basically business world, and what are the difficulties that you faced that time?
Abi's question was this: he wants to know because he was involved in different kind of businesses, different kind of professions and businesses. He wanted to know how your family helped you, if in any way, and how do you manage to make the leap to become such a successful businessman as well as professional?
Especially in the film industry.
May I ask from which country do you come from?
I'm from India.
Oh, India has a big industry, film industry. Well, film industry, I joined it out of pure accident, because I love going to movies, and then in Hong Kong I started to send my articles to newspapers, sort of film critic, and they published this. Then at that time, I was working with Indian rediffusion, the wired broadcast. And rediffusion in 1957 officially started wired vision, so-called TV, in Hong Kong. Hong Kong first had TV equivalent in 1957. And I was the one behind it who prepared everything, the programming of the TV program. And if I may say so, I'm the first person, Chinese person, to start a television program bilingual in Hong Kong in 1957. But we prepared this for a number of years before that. And it's through television that I sort of learned something about motion picture, the technical side of it, because it's quite familiar in certain aspects. And then my sort of film critic columns attracted the attention of motion picture company boss. And he contacted me and sort of inducted me into film circle as more or less as an apprentice to write film scripts. And that's how gradually it developed into. And then when television started in Hong Kong, the film company persuaded me to join. That's how I joined. And with some, if I may say so, TV background. So I was able to, for instance, in TV news, every day, 5 o'clock in the evening, we telecast the news of the day. And the news would be in 8 millimeter films, 16 millimeter films. And the crew would come back 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And they developed the film, and I have to edit the film, and at the same time, prepare the English and Chinese commentary. And on the dot of 5 o'clock, it goes on. And so that's how I learned editing of the film. So when I joined the movie industry, I went to the studio to edit the film and thought I must be very well experienced because I got this from TV. And so, if I answered, that's how I got into film. And it's a very difficult learning process. Everything is different.
Thanks, Dr. Shen. Can I have the next question?
Brooke.
Hello, sir. Hi, everyone. So in answer to Rocky's question about your love for your country, it's very clear that you feel strongly about China as a country. So I guess you mentioned that you initially didn't want to learn Japanese at all, yet you worked for a period of time in Japan after. So I guess my question is sort of, how do you reconcile your sense of nationalism with having to deal with people, or not people, but ideas who you sort of have different opinions about, in the Johannean spirit of being able to get along with everyone, of having a longer table. Is that clear?
Yeah.
I guess so, specifically in this case. I grew up in Nanjing, so I sort of like grew up immersed in that culture. Just kind of curious.
Thank you. I think we have touched upon a sensitive topic now. Let me tell you, when I was with the Hong Kong government, and they seconded me to Japan, the Asian Project Organization, which is sort of affiliated with the United Nations, with the ASCA Commission in Asia. And everybody laughed. Say, this anti-Japanese guy is going to Japan. See how he can survive. I must say that after 18 years in that country, I think the Japanese people, they are lovely people. And I could appreciate their sufferings during the war. All the men, almost every single family, lost their husband or son. They had nothing to eat, and they were very patriotic, but deep inside, very unhappy with the government. And so I learned to distinguish, the distinction between the government, those who rule, and the people, those being ruled. They're quite different. And then Japan also preserved a lot of Chinese, good Chinese culture. Like when I was a young boy, or even in high school, even as a college student, when we see our professor, we bow. Japan today, they still bow. And we Chinese laugh at them. Oh, doing this kind of thing. But they learn from China. And we ourselves forget about this. And what I learned in Japan is the people are very nice, different. And then we Chinese say, oh, they may not be sincere. It's only superficial that they are polite, they bow. But I say, even if it's superficial, it's better than not being polite. See, one day I returned home for lunch. And when I opened the gate, we had a big iron gate, and shut it, it rattled. Why? Earthquake. And across the street next door, a Japanese lady hurriedly came out because of the earthquake. And when she saw me across the street, the narrow street, inside the iron gate, she stopped and bowed very politely and said, earthquake. So I also bowed and said very politely, earthquake, please be careful. That's Japan. You know, even though you are in danger of losing your life in an earthquake, you still do not forget to be courteous. It's not they're pretending to be courteous. It's building their culture that you need to be courteous to other people, especially love thy neighbors, you love yourself. And so it's a different, China and Japan, we have a long history of disagreements because in the Ming Dynasty, the Japanese we call them sea bandits, literally occupied part of the coastline in Fujian province, China. They would come, loot the villages and go back. So it's a long history of conflict. But there are many similarities because the Lei learned a lot of things from Tang Dynasty, from the Song Dynasty. And a lot of those, I should say, good values we no longer have in China. And if we want to find out what we Chinese were like, and or if I may put it, what we should be like, go to Japan, learn from them. I think in this world, it's too, how do you say, polarized everywhere. United States, you see the debate, it's ridiculous. And what we should do, not only Johanneans, I think every one of us should make an effort, make some contribution, however small, to lessen this polarization, to make ourselves and other people understand each other better, so that we will not be going into extremities, but we can coexist in this small world and do away with hatred. We can forget. No, I mean, we can forgive. We may not forget, but that's okay, as long as we forgive and we live together, and that's a good thing.
Thank you, Dr. Shen. We are running out of time because we need to serve dinner soon, but I promised to give Zoe the last question. So if everybody doesn't mind, I'll now let Zoe ask the last question. Dr. Shen will be around, so please feel free to approach him to ask him questions during dinner or after dinner. Zoe?
Sorry for being in the way between you and dinner. So I just have this question after reading this book. So there's a quote in the book about an idiom in Chinese, 白驹过隙,白駒過隙, meaning a white horse running through a narrow alley or gap. So it appeared several times, and you mentioned that you like this quote, so I just want to ask what this means to you.
Okay, literally, it's sort of human life. It's like a horse racing across a narrow gap, which means life just passes on so quickly. We are in this world for only a split second when compared to history. That's the literal meaning. Yet, despite this snapshot, we need to do something. Otherwise, why do we exist on this here? I think each of us need to think, how can we contribute in our short life to this world? I feel that we should all be grateful that we have been given birth and live, whether it's today, tomorrow, Middle Ages, or whatever. But we spend some time on this planet. And it's such a short time that I think what we should do is learn and serve. We learn so that we can serve better. Without learning, it's very difficult for you to do anything. And so that's my explanation of this quote.
Thank you, Dr. Shen. So if I may conclude by summarizing what I think is the spirit of St. John's after talking to Dr. Shen for the past week, after the next session, and after, of course, living in this college for the past year, this college that Dr. Shen and the Johanneans have so lovingly built. I think if I put it very simply, I think to me, the spirit of St. John's is about serving society through morality and virtues, through the love of humanity. And I think, of course, to bridge diverse cultures, diverse peoples, and diverse worlds through the practice of what we call the 3F spirit, right? Fraternity, fellowship, and friendship. So on that note, as we are gathered here for fellowship and friendship, can we please give Dr. Shen a round of applause for his time. Now we will invite our principal, Dr. Henry Yu, to give a token of appreciation to Dr. Shen.
Thank you so much to Dr. Shen for coming, for Jane for coming, for the Johanneans also to be here to help celebrate Founders Week. When I started as principal here, we didn't have a Founders Week, we didn't have a Founders Dinner, and in some sense, I think a lot of people they thought, why is it called St. John's? Are you a seminary? Are you training, ministers? Are you a Christian? So there's a lot of confusion about what St. John's was. I think I can say now that what we've hopefully succeeded in doing is that nobody coming in here after the first month will have any confusion about where they are and who founded this place and what the connection is. And so I thank you and Jane and everyone else, all the Johanneans, for helping our residents, whether it's your first year or whether you've been here now several years, to understand what and who we are and our connection to St. John's University. So I wanted to just give some gifts. See if this box will open. One is a scarf. It's a Susan Point design. And Susan Point was the Musqueam artist who made that print as well as the one in our Fairmont Social Lounge. Fairmont Social Lounge, by the way, is named in honor of Fairmont Shipping, Robert Ho company. So this is one that hopefully that when you take that back to San Francisco, that you and Jane can enjoy that.
Good.
The other is knowing your love of Japan, and for those who don't know, my wife is Japanese. So, but this is a ceramic a Japanese artist has made, and as you can see, it has many geese. And so, again, a metaphor in Japan for a flock and being together and community. And so, again, hopefully, when you return and you, I'm not sure what you're supposed to put on this. Maybe nothing. I don't think Japanese ceramic. Many of them are not actually meant to be used. So, but whatever you put or not put on it, I hope this reminds you of your visit here as well. And thank you again for joining us in Founders Week.
Well, these what? Both very good.
Yeah, but thank you. With that, thank you to Edgar and Zoe for being our voices in talking to Dr. Shen. The Johanneans are here. Unfortunately, we have you surrounded, but I think during dinner, perhaps if any of the Johanneans wish to, you can go out and maybe mingle or the other way around, because we don't want to make it seem like we've segregated you, and we didn't. But we wanted you to have the front row seats while the conversation was happening. But during dinner, please feel free to change places and mingle and things like that. But thank you again, and please join me in again thanking Dr. Shen and Jane for joining us.
I think dinner is served, so as courtesy, let's allow our Johanneans, our guests, to go have the first taste of the beautiful food or the sumptuous food that our chef has provided for us. And invite the Johanneans to start.
If I may, as the doctor you suggested, we fill the tables instead of sort of scattering around.
Thank you. Okay, so perhaps please, Johanneans, go grab a dish and then feel free to go and displace any of our residents, and we'll have some musical chairs, so you can and you don't have to go out alone, but in however many groups you want to, because I think a lot of our residents would love to just again get to know you on a casual basis, and so I think it's a perfect way to do it, because that's what we do here every night, is we get to know each other over dinner and over food and share bread. So feel free to please go up, grab some food, and come back and sit anywhere.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, George. Yeah, sure. Okay. You want to do it now?
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe, actually, while we're standing, perhaps we could get a a group picture with all the Johanneans who are here. Thank you. Sure, come on. Since everybody's got to stand up anyways. How about this? Why don't the residents, while we're taking this picture, go grab some food? Since, yeah? Thank you. Okay. This may take a little while. Okay.
Picture.
Residents, please go and help yourself first.
Thank you, Grace. That's a good point.